Hello, well, a very good afternoon. My name's Rob, and I'm going to be your host today for today's virtual summit of the Future of Corporate Learning for Businesses, the EMEA edition. Let's start by talking about Group Futurista, who are hosting today's virtual summit. Now, Group Futurista are a leading global events company creating its own emerging technology summits, where creativity fosters and innovations flourish. They believe in the power of networking, connecting innovative thinkers with the brightest minds from industries, academia, and government organizations at a global level, a well-known organization and platform for virtual events. And today we're going to dive straight into today's topic, which is the future of corporate learning for businesses, EMEA edition. And it's an exciting event that brings together organizations to explore the transformative power of continuous learning in today's dynamic business landscape. This immersive virtual summit offers interactive speeches, thought-provoking panel discussions, enabling attendees to gain the skills and knowledge necessary to thrive in the digital age. By investing in corporate learning, businesses can empower their employees, foster a culture of collaboration and adaptability, and ultimately drive organizational success. Join us at this summit to embrace the future of learning and ensure a future-ready enterprise. And it is my pleasure to welcome our gold sponsor for today, which is Skillsoft. Now, Skillsoft, for organizations ready to unleash their edge, Skillsoft delivers online learning across a broad variety of in-demand topics, combined with a powerful, flexible, and engaging platform. Unlike other providers, Skillsoft offers inclusive options for all. Our effectiveness and variety are unmatched. In fact, Skillsoft empowers 36 million people worldwide. We help companies build better leaders, stay safe, and follow critical regulations. We enable people to increase IT skills and earn essential certifications. We help learners develop skills and organizations build teams that they need to stay ahead in a rapidly changing world. And we are going to hear from a member of the Skillsoft team a little bit later on, but here's how today's going to work. We are going to have 5 amazing keynotes from 5 amazing keynote speakers, and then after each keynote we're going to do a Q&A. So during the keynote session, if you think of a question that you would like to ask that particular keynote speaker, type your question into the Q&A box, and then I'll be facilitating a question and answer session after every single keynote. And then at the end of today's virtual summit, 4 of our keynote speakers are also going to join us in a panel discussion where we'll be discussing the topic as a whole and covering anything that we haven't already covered. So make sure you get your questions in. But first off, our first keynote is going to be delivered by Darshini Santhanam, who is the Global Head of Scaled Customer Training at Google Cloud. It's an absolute pleasure to have her here with us. She has over 18 years of experience enabling and developing individuals, teams, and organizations to achieve sales growth in the digital technology space. With a focus on learning and marketing, her breadth of experience stretches across strategy, management, sales, business development, program management, support, and operations. She's led teams and has held business critical leadership roles at Google and at Microsoft across the APAC and the EMEA regions, and even run global teams. She currently leads the global scaled customer training function for Google Cloud and is based in London. And she is going to be delivering her keynote on creating a learning culture. So Darshini, it's all over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. Incredibly pleased to be here. Welcome to all the participants. I hope you'll find the rest of the afternoon really useful for you, and I look forward to many of your questions. All right, so I'm here today to talk to you about addressing skills gap by developing a learning culture and what that really means. And I'm going to use ourselves as an example as I talk through this. And when I say ourselves, I talk about cloud learning, Google Cloud, as well as Google, and the wider culture that we have worked on influencing to really drive learning as a core element of everything that we do. So without further ado, let me get into it. And let's call out something that really is often an elephant in the room when I talk to learning professionals. Training does not equal learning. Learning is much more than just being a point in time training. And a study recently showed that 70% of learning and development is still done through traditional classroom instruction. That is typically your instructor-led training. While classroom training itself is really not the issue and is often very critical, depending solely on classroom training can often be the challenge that organizations face. So really starting to distinguish between what's training and what's learning can be the point at which you start a discussion for how you bring learning to become a core part of all things culture within your organization. Now, at Google, I'll share an example. We don't call ourselves the training organization. We don't call ourselves, um, an instructor organization. We call ourselves a learning services organization. And that's really because we think of learning as being a service that has to be offered, something that has a far deeper impact than just what happens in the classroom at a point in time. So that's a common pitfall to watch out for. And as I mentioned, I will be talking about this in the context of all things cloud skilling. Not for too long, but I do want to encourage all the participants to think about what I'm saying to apply it to other scenarios as well. Ultimately, skilling can be addressed by really developing a learning culture, irrespective of what skills you're dealing with. There are few industries where this may not apply. For a vast majority of industries, getting skilling out there can happen effortlessly in an organization when you have the right learning culture. So use this as an example, right? When I go in and I look for cloud skills, and obviously I'm using Google as a search engine, the typical responses you see come up are really cloud skills challenge, cloud skills gap, cloud skills shortage. Clear indicator that these are the challenges that are currently being faced in the industry. Now, I'm not going to talk about how we do cloud skilling. That's the least important part of it. But what I do want to call out is there's been a huge shift. In all industries, digital transformation has fundamentally changed the kind of skills every organization needs to be successful. So irrespective of which industry you're in, the fundamental requirements that we have of people has changed. And in the cloud industry, we've seen that the demand has gone up 77%, where 77% of respondents have cited a lack of knowledge or expertise as being their biggest challenge to transformation. Now, this number may look different when you're looking at a different set of skills. It may look different when you're looking at AI, which could potentially be a much higher number there. Or it may look different when you're thinking about other digital skills that your employees now need to be really successful. However, what's important to then recognize is really what are those elements of those skills that you really need to see in your new workforce. And when I say new workforce, I don't mean new hires. I mean your workforce that now has to modernize itself to really meet the needs of your business. In the case of cloud, we've identified that really cloud first requires a completely different set of IT skills from what IT skills have looked like in the past. And we've put that in 4 buckets. Innovation and being innovators is a really key part of it. Continuous evolution and learning is another part of it. Being able to enable businesses rather than just have to take direction from business is another big part of what the expectations are of IT teams today. They need to be they need to be at the table, part of the wider strategic discussion on all things business, not just limited to executing outcomes of business. And then finally, the 4th one is really, they need the ability to scale rapidly with high availability. So when you think about this, combined with the stats on the previous slide, where 77% of respondents actually said there's a gap, there's an urgent need here for something to be filled. And I'd urge you to think about how this could apply within your own organizations and within your own industries. As I mentioned previously, this may vary to a degree, but really the gaps do exist because the world has changed and people haven't changed nearly as quickly as the world has. Now, building a culture of continuous learning feels like an obvious thing to put on the title of a slide, right? And it's been long proven to really be the effective strategy to really drive great business impact over a period of time. So getting your culture around learning right can have such a long-term impact on everything that you do. And developing a culture where learning is integral develops teams that may not know the answers to questions you don't even know you have in the future, right? With everything evolving as quickly as it is, we don't know what kind of problems we may be solving a few years down the road. But what you want are teams that are agile enough to be able to adapt to that and really take up opportunities that come their way or ask the right questions when the time is right. So you want that kind of adaptive mindset on the team. And that's a critical skill, really, for keeping up with this fast-changing industry. Employees also need to learn to accept change. Change is hard for anyone. You change your toothbrush, you feel it the next day. Change is hard at every level. Organization goes through a reorg, it has massive impact on people. So irrespective of the scale of change, what you want is you want to create an employee pool that really have the ability to accept change, embrace the challenges, and embrace the new knowledge that comes with it. Without having the ability to go gain that knowledge really quickly, employees are going to lose opportunities and lose the ability to be relevant in their workforce over a period of time. You saw on the previous slide that where I showed you IT skills and how that has varied, and what we're seeing as trends to be key requirements for IT skills now. What's that going to look like in the future? We don't know. We may have some inkling and we have a hypothesis, but we may not know for sure. And what you want, again, is an employee pool that will be willing to accept what comes at them. So with that, I also want to call out that there's real business impact to be had. Not only is it great for your employees, but there's a huge side effect that it creates on the learning culture, where really employees start to feel empowered and committed and deeply engaged with the organizations they're working for. Now, prioritizing learning at your organization is a great way to foster a better and more dynamic workplace. This is a better environment for everyone. Learning and development opportunities have been closely tied to employee engagement and productivity. There are tons of studies that call it out, but I wanted to call out specifically a recent HBR article that suggested that learning can help reduce and alleviate stress in employees, where the recommendation was for employees to feel like they're more engaged and find their motivation again, that they take to learning, to really use the opportunity to build new skills as a way to alleviate stress and find their joy at work again.
Darshini, I'm really sorry. I'm just going to interrupt. We've lost your PowerPoint. Is there any chance you could share your screen again for us, please?
Yes, let me do that. I wonder why that may have happened. Did you lose it a long time ago, or are you able to see it now?
We're able to, hang on, it's just starting. There we go. We've got it. We're back.
Excellent. Did anyone miss any slides? I can always go back. Okay, feel free to ask me questions. Hopefully you can all still hear me and I can keep going. Okay.
Yes, all good. Carry on.
Thank you, Rob. All right. So companies with learning cultures are really 58% more likely to have skills in their talent pipelines to meet changing marketplace needs. And the reason I want to call this out is we don't have people coming out of college necessarily ready with all the skills that our workplace needs today. That's also evolving as we speak. What people are studying and what they're coming out qualified to do is not as ready for the job market as it used to be 30, 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago. With needs changing so quickly, what organizations do need to seek out is to develop their existing workforce. And sometimes the opportunity for the skills exists. So it's really about creating the environment where you bring that opportunity to life and retrain your workforce where it makes sense, so you're able to continue to leverage that incredible talent pool that you've already nurtured over the last many years. I mean, it's far easier, and I know the HR professionals in the room would agree with this, it's far easier to retrain your workforce and retrain and retain your workforce than to try to go out and hire afresh, especially when you know that you step out to hire and you're not necessarily going to find the skills you need in the market either. So creating a learning culture, critical on so many levels. It's important to set you up for the future, but it's really also important to set you up for maximizing the talent pool that you have today. Okay, so I've told you about why it's important to change and why it's important to look at learning cultures within organizations, but I'm going to now talk about the how. And again, I'll utilize some examples of success that I have witnessed directly within my own organizations or with the customer pool that I've worked with. So how do you go about creating that learning culture? 3 things. Make learning part of your core value. I'll talk about how we do that. Establish strong leadership support. leadership support is absolutely key to getting your culture right. And then ensure that systems support your training and your learning. So let's talk about making learning a core value. Now, in order to make learning a part of your culture, you want commitment from the entire organization. That is absolutely critical. It also starts with that commitment and what values and beliefs are around training. So make it safe to fail. Very often, we believe that success in the workplace looks like constant success, win after win. However, in order to create a learning environment, a successful learning environment, you really want to think about what it means to fail and if your employee pool have the psychological safety required within the organization to fail. If failure is punished, simply put, people are not going to try new things. And that defeats the entire purpose of attempting to build up a strong learning culture. So really help your employees to see and treat failures as opportunities to learn. Encourage it. I was once part of an organization that gave out quarterly awards for failure. So incidentally, I put my hand up and I said, okay, I have a nomination. Here's a campaign that I ran that was an absolute disaster, and I won an award for it. But that was a first. First for me, a first for the organization. But it fundamentally changed how I would think about running campaigns in the future. So sharing that personal example, because I do think that there's a ton of opportunity within organizations to create that safe space for failure. Next, really think about introducing the idea of reflection. Like knowledge transfer is not learning, it only starts the learning process. But introduce space for people to take what they're learning and turn it into something deeper to reflect on what they're picking up. And then give them the space to reflect, absorb, and really practice what they're learning as they keep progressing. So really make it a part of the core value, give them the space and the time to go do this. Learning really needs to be built into the DNA, right? So starting with when an employee onboards, all the way through their career, you have an opportunity right there to demonstrate that this is a core value for you. So I'd urge you to think about all the different ways in which you could turn learning into a core value that you live and breathe on a daily basis. Second, establish strong leadership support. Strong sponsorship is an absolute requirement for learning culture to be successful. It has to start at the top. So you want to think about what your leadership are doing, what they're talking about, how they're sharing their learning experiences top down. Perhaps even roping in leadership as early adopters of training materials can go a really long way to role model the kind of behavior you want to see within the organization. Employees need to see top down what leaders believe in, what their core values are, and need to see it in practice. So that becomes a really important part of how you establish a learning culture in the organization. And I can tell you, when we're going to talk about tools and processes in a moment, but very often, either within my own organization or organizations that I work with very closely, we agree on metrics that we're going to track for learning, whether it's done through KPIs or what we call OKRs, or through public acknowledgements of what we're agreeing on. We do that in partnership closely with leadership and have leadership actually take the first couple of steps. So when we're launching new programs within organizations, we want the leaderships to attend training first, to go get certified or finish whatever's required of them as early as possible, and then have them then speak to their organizations around their experience, and then encourage them to go out and complete the required learnings. So seeing that happen over and over again really builds a nice rhythm through which you'll see organizations pick up learning in a role modeled way. And I just wanted to share one example of an account that I worked with where they did this. They worked top down with their leadership and really, they saw the great results coming in and really saw the culture of learning seeping into their organization because they had support and buy-in from those in leadership. So having leadership just say something is okay, but having them actually live that and go do the work required to contribute to that learning culture is another big part of it. The third part that I did want to talk about is what it takes to then have this all come to life, where the rubber hits the road, right? So invest in building processes and tools that support and incentivize learning. So make learning fun, right? We talked about how a vast majority of training is still classroom training, despite what happened with COVID and our affinity for virtual. We're still seeing classroom instructor-led, even if they're virtual, instructor-led programs as being amongst the most popular style of programs today. So make it fun, gamify it. Think about hackathons or gamified approaches where you could really get people involved and have them feel emotions around what they're participating in, going beyond just what's required of them. So study jams or sessions where people can come together who are at different points in time in their learning journey, but want to be able to share their learning experience with each other or answer each other's questions. Building a bit of community around it can be another great way to build that fun, more communal, emotional, like a positively emotional element associated with their learning experience. Create a training budget, dedicate funds to it, and advocate for it internally. Emphasize how much the organization values a climate of learning by actually putting the money where their mouth is. So put the resources behind the actual opportunities. Make resources available for continued education. We talked a little bit about how you can be impactful with the culture all the way from day one of an employee through to how you go about retaining and growing them. The same applies for the actual learning programs that you consider. So if you've had someone grow in the organization, what do their needs look like today? Are there platforms that they could gain access to where they could continue their learning? Do they require support in identifying what's next? Do you need to be giving them learning paths or recommended approaches? Or do you think that at this point in time, they would be able to self-serve and manage their own needs? Very often, employees actually do need a lot more support and would prefer to have a learning path that they can refer to. But building structure and processes and communications around this could really go a long way to encourage them to really pick up what's next. And then ensure that your team have the resources to engage in informal learning as well. Create opportunities for them to go learn things for the sake of learning, not learning for the sake of finishing a certification or doing a job-specific training. When you create an environment where they're able to go learn other things, maybe your team event can be going to learn to make coffee, or I know this became quite popular as well, going to go do crafts together. But learning anything new, learning a new skill needs to be joyful. And once you're able to show them that you support learning for learning's sake, suddenly work-based learning also becomes a lot more enjoyable because their minds are now open to this idea of learning. And then incentivize learning, finally, like really incentivize learning, recognize accomplishments. Think about ways in which when someone goes out and does some learning on their own, organizations call that out in a very positive light and use them as role models to continue to encourage others to also take that risk of going and learning. So invest in the processes, the tools, and the policies within your organization that are going to support and really incentivize learning. So with that, I wanted to wrap up and say you've got 3 key ways to get there, right? We know learning culture is really important. Here are 3 things you need to do to get there. Make it a part of your core values, right? Walk the walk, talk the talk, and walk the walk. Establish strong leadership sponsorship, have it show top down, and ensure that your systems support learning. That way you've created a nice little foundation on which your organization is now ready for what's next. With that, I want to leave you with a question. What is your commitment to learning in your organization? And where do you want it to be? That, I will hand it back over to Rob. Thank you so much for being patient with me and hearing me out.
Darshini, thank you so much. Before you go, though, we do have a couple of questions that have come in from people who have been watching your amazing keynote. So we're going to dive straight in. The first one I have got are, what are some of the key features of social learning platforms?
I think this is an interesting question and maybe a good one to consider even in the panel later today, Rob. But I do think that building an online community into your platform where you have the ability to connect learners to learners. So it's not just instructor to learner, but learner to learner, where you have more advanced learners with the newer learners. You have that kind of a mixed cohort, so to speak, would be really key for us going forward into the future. Again, because we don't know exactly what we're going to scale up, or we know now, but that's going to change in a couple of years. And as things change, what you want is a community that's going to continue to support each other. And in terms of social platforms, I'd urge you to think about all of the, like many of the developer platforms that exist today, where you have developers kind of going, talking to each other, supporting each other. I feel like that they're already doing a brilliant job of building a very positive dependency on each other.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question that's come in. How do collaborative platforms enhance workplace productivity?
When I read the question, the first thought that came to my mind was this. Look, when I'm working and I have a question, I don't want to wait to be scheduled for a training to get this done. I don't even want to have to go somewhere to an online platform, do a bunch of searches, find the right training, attend 30 minutes of training, and then do it, right? Like that's going to disrupt me from the work that needs to be done. So I think the most effective platforms will help you find that answer really quickly. So if I were a developer, I got stuck, I go to a platform, I ask a question, or I go to a Slack channel and I ask a question, I get the answer, boom, I'm done. I'm getting on with the job and I've learned something new on the way. And it's been a safe experience for me to go learn something new. That to me is, I think, how we will ultimately really enhance productivity, right? Get people to their tasks, to completion of tasks as quickly as we possibly can.
I like that. And then we've got one more question. It kind of harks back to the first question I asked you. Do you have any examples of successful social learning initiatives in an educational setting?
That is a great question. I have been out of the education space. So I've been in more customer-facing roles in the last couple of years, but I've been out of the education space about 3 years now. I don't have specific examples. But again, I would say if you look at some of the developer platforms, that's where you're seeing that really quick interaction, quick engagement of developers with different capabilities kind of supporting each other, where it's really decentralized access to information, right? So I would urge you to think about those. And I know many of those platforms are also very popular in the higher education space, for example. So they're pretty agnostic to where the developers are coming from.
Amazing. Well, Darshini, thank you so much, not only for your keynote, but also for taking those questions as well. And I believe you're joining us a little bit later on for our panel discussion too.
That's right. I look forward to being back. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, there we go. That is our first keynote done and dusted. And we're going to move very swiftly on with keynote number 2. And this is going to be delivered by Mark Onisk, who is the Chief Content Officer at Skillsoft, who are our amazing gold sponsor here at today's event. Now, since becoming the Chief Content Officer in 2018, Mark has been responsible for leading all aspects of Skillsoft's content catalog, including strategic direction, roadmap, and development. Mark previously served SVP of Skillsoft Books, successfully launching the company's book summary product, increasing the audiobook collection by more than 60% and creating the largest collection of audiobooks in the corporate learning market. Prior to Skillsoft Books, Mark led Skillsoft's strategic business development, where he worked on cross-functional projects and service teams to deliver integrated learning experiences with key clients. Mark became Skillsoft's VP content production after the company acquired Element K in 2011. His career with Element K spanned 15 years, where he was responsible for product strategy, content development, and operational execution. Mark holds an MBA from the Rochester Institute of Technology and Bachelor's of Science in Finance and Economics from the State University of New York College at Brockport. And Mark is going to be delivering his keynote on developing workforce at scale, how to assess, measure, and develop talent. So Mark, it is all over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for the introduction. So I know we don't have a lot of time here, but what I'd like to do in our time that we have is maybe just tee up some basic trends and concepts and how learning organizations are kind of addressing these challenges. And I know that we'll have the opportunity to maybe unpack some of these things in more detail during our roundtable and panel discussion later. So I get an opportunity to do a lot of work with World Economic Forum as a part of our membership in the organization. And one of the most insightful pieces of research that the group publishes is the Future of Jobs report. Now, the latest one was actually published in early May of this year. And, part of what goes into this report is a survey of around 800 or so leading organizations, and they're across all different industries, whether it's technology, healthcare, manufacturing, so on and so forth. When those 800 companies are asked, where do you see the job growth over the next 5 years? Not surprisingly, 8 of the top 10 jobs are technology jobs. There's the things you'd expect. Certainly AI and machine learning, sustainability, even data and analytics, cybersecurity are all the things that kind of dominate the headlines. When you ask those same companies, where do they see the skills growth in those organizations? Ironically, some of the same skills are actually human skills. Their leadership, resilience, systems thinking, analytical thinking, their cognitive skills. And so really what we see is that organizations certainly need the technology skills and hard skills to actually execute on the work, but they still need the human skills and cognitive skills to actually add and drive value. And we really see that, growth in the global economy hinges upon how those technical skills, interplay with the human skills to make people be effective. Now, a couple other interesting points. Another piece of data that was focused in that report was, by some estimates, about a fifth of the global workforce could have almost half of their work fully automated over the next 5 years. I will say that this initial insight was collected in November of 2022. We would fully expect, as we sit here in July 2023, that most organizations probably estimate the number to be higher than that. Maybe it's as much as a third. We can only speculate. But in either case, the impact of generative AI and how it will impact the front lines, all the way up to the senior and executive levels in every organization industry is undeniable. And in that same light, most people today, most employees feel that their organizations don't really give them the training that they need. So therefore, you have about 60% of the global workforce seeks training outside of their current employer, right? And when you think about it, it's kind of intuitive. I think as learning leaders, you probably have observed that many of your programs target the high performers, the high potentials, the new managers. On the technology side, they may target the cloud architects, the cybersecurity engineers, and so forth. And by definition, those programs are targeting the top 1 or 2%. In many cases, your training is actually going to serve the folks that are actually, in some cases, already the best leaders in your organization, or some of the most informed and technologists that you have in your organization. And so we think that's really the opportunity relative to learning and development, is how do you democratize and scale those capabilities in a very interesting way. Having said all that, let's just talk about some basic trends that were in action here. And so, I have the opportunity to meet with customers across all different industries and meet with analysts at a lot of different levels in our organization. Some basic trends that we're seeing here in 2023 is number one, generative AI is redefining like what we teach as a profession, meaning the curriculum that we put out in the market, how we enable and how we get learners to kind of understand the basic technologies. It's redefining how we teach, how we deliver that training, given just the generative elements of AI. The ability to interact in a much more robust and dynamic fashion has never been more dynamic, and certainly that's influencing how we're actually developing a curriculum, and ultimately how we as a profession of education technology professionals collaborate and work together to develop these learning solutions. Now, the other point that I would make is, in a world bereft with prompt engineering, large language models, GPT, BARD, and the like, leadership skills have never been more critical. And I think there's a very famous quote that in an age of artificial intelligence, what you need are leaders with emotional intelligence. And I think as we pilot and steer through this transformation, these are the skills that we really need to think about. It's not just the technical skills that people need to reimagine work, but they need to understand the ethical guardrails for the technology. You know, we're entering a period in time where the technology is going to be so robust, so capable of automating things that were previously done by humans, that we really need to be very thoughtful about how we actually leverage that in such a way that, you know, it actually is reasonable, it's ethical, and complies certainly with all the different, you know, regulations and guidelines that are actually coming into the market. So by definition, you know, even something that seems as completely technical and you know, requiring incredible technology skills like generative AI is actually a composite of both leadership skills as well as kind of managing risk and compliance. And so I think learning leaders need to really consider that. And with that, you know, I'll just say that generative AI raises a new set of ethical and legal and compliance issues that are changing as quickly as the technology itself. And I think that poses a challenge for learning leaders. I know that some organizations are on one side of the continuum and saying, listen, we're not going to do anything with generative AI until it becomes more stable, and they're trying to enforce moratoriums inside their groups that actually prevent them from experimenting. I don't think that's realistic. We have to expect that our employees are going to go out, they're going to have and be able to go into things like GPT and almost an open source level, and they're going to be interacting with it. And so we have to give them the guardrails and the understanding of kind of what the expectations are. We can't expect that people are going to be completely out of that, you know, out of that technology. And as we think about learning in kind of this generative AI era, you know, and we graduate from what I consider to be kind of the YouTube era of on-demand video. I fully expect that richer, more intelligent learning solutions will be expected, you know, from our learning constituents, right, from their audiences. They're not going to be happy just with passive video content, passive curriculum that just basically has like recorded lectures and videos. They're going to really want to index and benchmark where they're at. They're going to want to interact with the products in a very rich way, and they're going to want them to be increasingly personalized. And the final thing I would just observe around kind of just basic trends in action is that while generative AI is gathering many of the headlines today, we should never underestimate how sustainability and just the need to train people on that general understanding and fluency and sustainability relative to their specific functions will impact our you know, impact education technology and how we think about our curriculum. I do think that continues to be a topic that goes underserved in most corporate learning agendas. And in a world where sustainability analysts are going to be the number 2 profession only behind generative AI engineers, we need to understand how are we actually equipping people to think about business in a sustainable, scalable manner, and how do we actually inform people on the basic kind of SDG goals and what that looks like, and how does that influence business every day. You know, I really think that learning leaders need to consider that at a lot of levels. So let's talk about how we think about learning as a point of transformation. You know, I often say when people ask, you know, what does Skillsoft do? Well, you know, many people may consider Skillsoft to be a provider and publisher of content first, but I actually view us as be a provider of workforce transformation solutions. But really, what is workforce transformation? What does that really look like? This is a model that I'm looking at right here that was actually published originally by Accenture. And I think it does a pretty good job of kind of laying out a framework to how to think about workforce transformation. And I think kind of the first step in that process is to, number one, just to reimagine work. What does the future of work look like with the technology? You know, how do you actually discuss and understand and really identify what those emerging capabilities are? And once you actually reimagine work, then you need to identify and actually prioritize what those skill gaps are. And so kind of that combination of like really assessing your workforce, benchmarking where they are today, and then being able to prioritize that becomes very critical in any type of learning strategy. And finally, you need to pivot your workforce. And when you think about what pivoting really means, it is actually kind of identifying the different strata and spans in your workforce. Who needs to be fluent in a given area? Where do you need to have proficiency? And where do you really need to have mastery, and how you track an index on all those different things? But ultimately, this is kind of a very simple recipe or formula to think about transformation. Now, no sooner do you kind of lay out a transformation kind of agenda like that with 4 pillars, you need to have a process and a framework for doing that. And so this is actually just a very basic kind of transformation or skilling framework that we use with our customers that kind of lays things out kind of front to back, at least in a sequence. So an idea here is number one is to start with, the basic prioritization of skill areas that are important to your organization. Now, I have another view of this chart that actually starts with kind of the business imperative as kind of the level set. In most cases, your skilling priorities should, are largely tied and informed by your strategy as a business. So as you're thinking about what are the skill priorities for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, you need to really be in lockstep with the strategy of the business so that when you actually sit down in front of your executive stakeholders, you can have a crisp articulation of how your learning is and the skill priorities are actually supporting what you're doing as a business. I know that's a kind of a blinding statement, the obvious. The way in which we kind of do that inside of our products is we have a set of learning role-based journeys that we call Aspire, which connect to the roles of the future that, not surprisingly, are aligned to what we see in World Economic Forum and other venues relative to things like generative AI, data science, cybersecurity, and certainly even, more product-related skills like agile, product management, design thinking, and so forth. As we think about that, the question then really becomes then how do you actually benchmark those skills? What does the current gap look like versus where your desired end state would be? And really the key element in building that learning culture is actually get people into the habit of benchmarking and assessing their performance, right? And this isn't suggested to be a performance appraisal. What you're really trying to do is just get a pulse on where people's skills are at today so that they can actually go into some reasonable element of skill development. And as a part of skill development, again, we think about that in the context of not only self-study e-learning, but certainly, things that are even like event driven, instructor-led, cohort-based experiences, certainly even digital books and audiobooks would be a part of that. But you want to be able to basically have your benchmarks and gap analysis actually feed into that. And I will say, generally, it's not the first 3 phases of this engagement or of this model that organizations have challenges with. In many cases, organizations understand what their skill priorities are. They may have a definition of the personas. They may be able to assess it at some level, and they may have recommended learning. But where learning organizations typically stall and where learning initiatives stall are really in the back half of this chart. How do you engage learners and keep them coming back? How do you ensure that those skills transfer and are apparent on the job? And how do you analyze and report on those things? And I will say, relative to skills engagement, certainly there's kind of the traditional feeds of promotional emails, engagement emails, things like goals, streaks, and reminders. And we do that within our product every day. But I think the thing that we really found that was a breakthrough, was actually thinking about credentialing and digital badges. So we actually issued digital badges at 30 to 45 minutes, in length. Once people complete a course at that level, they get a digital credential that they can share in their LinkedIn profile, they can share on Twitter. It actually stays with them their entire career. What most organizations do is they stack multiple credentials on top of each other in order to get kind of a stacked badge model that actually corresponds to the different personas that they're tracking to. But ultimately, these are the things that actually create a learning culture. When you can encourage people to go and get their credentials, share them, promote them, take pride in them, when the organization can customize them, when you index opportunity, your talent marketplaces, how you're actually providing new job opportunities for people around things like credentials, that's actually the catalyst that starts to get people hyper engaged in development. And through that, you start to get to things like skill transfer. Now, where we typically start to advise on skill transfer in kind of a few different levels. One, you want to think about coaching. What are the coaching aspects, either internal coaches, external coaches, mentoring that help reinforce the behaviors that you expect to see as a result of your skill taxonomy? Because people go through immersion programs, they may get credentials, but you need to know that they're actually practicing those things on the job. And we always, like to advise customers to really think about your coaching network and how you're actually going to support and engage learners to do that. And then finally, relative to analytics, we always engage, ask people to think about, measuring the benchmarks kind of pre and post, so you really understand where those skills are actually coming from and how they're actually influencing your business, and be able to track it at a mastery level or awareness level, or even as people kind of move down that journey. So let's talk about, what some of these tool sets look like. I think number one key element is really tracking kind of proficiency over time. So certainly we have a set of capabilities in our products at Skillsoft that help us do that. We have a product called a skill benchmark. We have a set of dashboards in our platform, Percipio, where we can do a few different things. Number one, the individual can understand their individual proficiency level. So in this case, we're looking at a Python proficiency level, and this we have a score of 68, which indicates that someone's still developing. We can do this across an entire population, so you can get a composite index of what someone's skills are. And I think the key is to really think about this being an objective measure. So that person's like really a 68 against the persona definition of what we expect to see in that skill. We're able to do some normative measures based on aggregating that information over time. So at a composite level, we see that this entire population is developing, and you can see that at point 1 and 2, we're actually growing kind of skill capability. But these are the types of insights that you want to be able to point to. And again, if you take the time up front to actually align your programs against those strategic initiatives, what will become very much self-evident is that you're actually building to and towards the maturation and the improvement in the overall strategy. Another component here, so when we think about like learning culture, a couple things to think about. Number one, you want to have leaders and managers act as the champions. Ultimately, when you think about building a learning culture, it's really how do you engage those frontline leaders so that they, take and ascribe value to it. To the extent that you're actually connecting your digital badges and your credentials to some form of career progression, whether it's posting for a new job, whether it's qualifying for, the next step in their career, that ultimately helps leaders and managers get behind that. And so we always advise folks that really focus on bringing the leaders and the managers on board, because they'll ultimately set those expectations with their employees. Communicate and articulate the value of development to the individuals, right? And I often get asked, from our customers, what can we do to get our learners engaged, to get the frontline engaged in actually finding the value in learning, so you don't just have to prescribe it and make it mandatory. And my first response is you need to connect that learning to opportunity. And I know that's a very general statement, but a very specific recommendation from that generalized perspective is, ensure that whatever digital credentials that you're issuing, that those count towards someone's ability to post for an open job, to post for an assignment. If you have a talent marketplace, if you have places where you're actually posting for new opportunities and positions, have those credentials be something that you use for those folks to actually post for those opportunities. And certainly you need to enable and give space for people to learn and practice. Having said that, I've always observed that really what you're in a competition for is someone's time. If they find value in what they're doing, if they find value in their pursuit of skill growth because they think it will connect to opportunity, they'll make time for it. But at the same point in time, you do need to expect that you're going to have to create some space for people to to actually do this, and then celebrate and recognize those achievements in the badges and credentials that folks earn. And I think that's a really important point to continue to do. And there's ways in which organizations do that at scale. Let's talk a little bit about alignment and curation. So we talked about this earlier on, that once you kind of prioritize where your skills are, you need to spend some time in actually developing what those learning journeys look like. And so we always actually ask folks to number one, really connect those learning journeys and those role-based journeys with the strategy of your enterprise. And usually you want to articulate that and express that in clear business terms. if your organization's goal is to basically create and build market share, well, that's expressed as revenue growth. Revenue growth is expressed either in customer retention, upgrades of those customers, or acquisition of new customers. And so inside of each one of those things are very specific skill sets. If it's acquisition of new customers, well, then you need to have outbound sales skills or ways in which you engage new customers. And there's certainly linguistic skills, communication that are a part of that, selling skills. And so those are how you actually connect those things to the opportunity. That allows you to kind of assess someone's current understanding of those skills. You can identify and understand their current level of proficiency, and then you can align and personalize those recommendations as a part of that. Again, we have a product we call a skill benchmark that helps you do that at scale, but it's very critical as you're kind of connecting those things to your overall kind of enterprise learning strategy. And as I said before, you need to connect that development to advancement. You need to create a forum in which you enable people to kind of create those connections. They can surface those pathways, and they can post for new opportunities, either in the form of progression inside their own job role as a part of that, or posting for assignments or activities or tasks that could be interesting, compelling to them, and allow them to enrich their own experience, or even to post to altogether new jobs, right, that are inside your organization. So, the one thing I would say is, if you take your credentials seriously and the badges that your workforce is earning seriously, so that they can post for new positions, ultimately that will have a corresponding impact on the organization at large. And I think the final statement that I'll actually put out here, because I know we don't have a whole lot of time carved out this in this particular segment, is really to think about how you upskill and reskill. And I think this one quote I find pretty compelling and interesting, and we kind of serve this up for customers across the board, and that is, in a rapidly evolving digital world, you need to upskill and reskill to serve the customers that need you. So many of us, again, across a wide range of organizations, whether you're work in finance, healthcare, manufacturing, or in a technology-based company, we understand that technology across multiple levels, whether it's generative AI, whether it's data, whether it's cybersecurity, or whether it's sustainability, is continuing to transform our businesses, right? And so really it is the learning leaders to help effectuate that and help us continue to drive and sustain value for our broader constituencies that we serve. And with all that said, I know we're about just 2 or 3 minutes away from kind of the closing time. I'll pause there. I see that we've had some questions that have come into the chat. I'm happy to respond to those or answer any additional questions that folks might have.
Mark, thank you so much for your keynote presentation, and you've kind of done my job for me in the sense of, yes, we have had some questions come in from people who have been watching your keynote. So we'll dive straight into those. The first one, what power skills do you find to be the most important to scale across an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what's interesting, and again, I encourage folks to read the Job Outlook report from World Economic Forum, because there's an entire section that actually addresses this. I think we're moving into an era where the true power skills in an organization are going to be cognitive skills, like critical thinking, decision-making, judgment, analytical thinking, the ability for people to think really critically at all levels inside an organization. The challenge that we have today is that most L&D functions are heavily indexed across, foundational leadership competencies, things like accountability, coaching, communication, delivering feedback. And those things are certainly important, but the challenge is that when you survey the executive teams in most of these organizations, they're going to go back and point to the cognitive skills and analytical skills as being the things that are the most important. So I would just encourage organizations and learning leaders to really focus on those areas of discipline first.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Next question. It's quite a broad question, but how can technology be leveraged to develop talent at scale?
Yeah, that is a pretty broad question. I think there's a whole host of ways. I think first and foremost, the technology allows you to understand and diagnose and index the current readiness and skill level of your workforce, right? I think at some level, the technology, especially with generative AI, will allow you to get a sentiment on the values and practice and knowledge that people actually have today. And I'm actually very optimistic that one of the key capabilities of generative AI will be to take all these different work streams and things that we have that go on in an organization, whether it's basically the individual interactions and virtual chats that people have and how they actually post and the sentiment that we see there in certain meetings to help get a great index of where people's performance is at. And also to really have a better understanding of what people do day to day. I think one of the challenges we have in a lot of technologies is that they're informed by heritage skill frameworks and competency models and job descriptions that don't necessarily bear the reality to what that business does day to day. And I think the opportunity for technology is to make that real time. And I think technology platforms where they can be the most impactful is recommending learning opportunities and skill development based on the understanding that people have today and their current skill sets, and to really do that at scale. So that's probably where I would probably start the focus, is really using that to try to index and measure where people are at, and then recommend meaningful and transformative learning experiences as a part of it.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Next question. What advice would you offer to those who are watching today who are developing or delivering a leadership program during these disruptive times? What should they do first?
That's a great question. I think there's probably 2 or 3 skill sets I would strongly advise that every organization includes in their leadership development programs, especially during this time. Number one, leading with empathy and emotional intelligence. You certainly have to have leaders that are cognizant, that they understand that we're operating in very disruptive times, that the headlines that many of their teams are reading are about how their job roles could be automated in the next 5 years. And they're seeing evidence of that, through GPT and a whole host of other platforms that are automating kind of those frontline interactions. So I think the one element I would say is empathy and emotional intelligence as leaders, I think is a critical skill. I think we need to have skills that actually help people think of AI as a team member and not necessarily as a replacement or something that's coming for, to displace people from their jobs. And I think that's important for leaders to really position that as an opportunity. I'd also say that growth mindset is a critical capability for all frontline leaders, and you should really think about how does your leadership program enable that. And then finally, like as I said, judgment, critical thinking, analytical thinking, really building those decision-making skills and cognitive skills in your leaders, I think is an incredibly underserved element of most leadership programs, and it really should be a central focus for how you think about your leadership capability development going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. So final question. Are you able to share your philosophy on what it takes to build a truly effective learning and development culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my view here is you largely get the culture that you measure, right? So to the extent that you're providing opportunity, that you're measuring skill development in a meaningful way, that people are connecting that with the opportunity both inside their current role and their aspirational roles, then you'll ultimately build a leadership learning culture. But generally speaking, it's very hard to get people curious in things that don't impact their day-to-day lives immediately. And the strong advice I always give to organizations who are struggling with adoption, struggling with getting learners, people engaged in things, is connected with opportunities that are real to them, so that they have a compelling with them for them to actually engage, to spend their time. So they're actually binging learning, they're binging instruction, they're binging skill development, instead of binging Netflix or Hulu or Prime or some other type of streaming platform. I think that's really the proposition that we need to put to our learners today.
I did say it was the final question. However, we have literally just had one more question come in whilst you were answering that one. So we'll go with it. What are the challenges in developing workforce at scale, and how can they be mitigated?
Yeah, I think the first challenge is that number one, most of the tooling, most of the curriculum that have been developed by learning leaders are very much indexed on the top 1 or 2%. And I think there's kind of a natural kind of muscle memory in organizations to say, hey, we have to have executive development programs, we have to have frontline leaders, we have to have high potential and high performance leaders. We need to certify our cloud engineers and cyber architects. And by definition, what you're doing is constructing a world where only the 1% or 2% can participate in leadership development, or learning, I should say. I think as you think about your skilling programs, and you think about building workforce transformation across the board, you need to start with the front line in mind. And the first step in that is just building basic fluency and literacy in whatever topic you're trying to build transformation around. A basic recipe I would advise to the group when you're thinking about any transformation, whether it's sustainability, generative AI, cybersecurity, data. Number one, what are the foundations of that topic? What are the common languages, the common lexicon, the things that everybody needs to know from the front line all the way up to the C-suite? Number two, what are the guardrails and fundamental principles for implementing that transformation? What are the things that they really need to be aware of from a regulation or just a compliance standpoint? Number three, now that they have the foundations and the guardrails, how should they really think about responsibly reimagining work? What's realistic? What are common skills to put out there, right? And you should really try to think about that, not only by the functions, whether it's sales, marketing, HR, finance, and so forth, but also think about it relative to your industry, what's reasonable. And I think once you establish those three things, then you can move into what are the leadership skills that you need to effectuate that transformation? Empathy, emotional intelligence, embracing failure, risk, and actually taking on those types of challenges. And then finally, what are the human skills that you need in your organization to sustain that progress? And I think ultimately, when you ask yourself those questions, you're going to come back to, we need critical thinking, decision making, cognitive abilities, and ultimately the ability to embrace risk and learn from failure. So I know that's a very quick recipe how to support workforce transformation, but those are probably the 3 to 5 buckets I would think about it in.
Brilliant. Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions and also for your keynote as well. You're going to be joining us a little bit later on for the panel discussion as well. But for now, Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. So there we go. That was Mark from our amazing gold sponsor, Skillsoft, and he's going to be back a little bit later on for our panel discussion. But right now, we've got one more keynote before we take a very quick break. And that keynote is going to be delivered by Dr. Himara Riaz, who is the Executive Talent and Assessment Director at the Lloyds Banking Group. Himara Riaz is a chartered clinical psychologist and associate fellow of the British Psychology Society. With 2 doctorates and specialism in neuropsychology, her 35-year career includes neuroscience service provision within the NHS and the Ministry of Defence and strategy consultancy at YSC. She was previously VP of Strategic Leadership at the Volvo Group with remit spanning talent, DEI and leadership development. She joined Lloyds Banking Group as Executive Talent and Assessment Director in March of this year. She's a regular media commentator on a wide range of subjects from post-pandemic leadership, resilience and the psychology of success in times of radical uncertainty. And Dr. Himara Riaz is going to deliver their keynote on harnessing leadership to create learning culture. So Himara, it's over to you.
Thanks so much, Rob. And a lot of what Mark just talked about resonates. And I hope there are some links that everybody can make on the back of that. I'm going to flip over to hopefully share my screen. And then we can get going. So Rob, just let me know if everything's showing up as it should. Great. I'm gonna carry on unless somebody tells me different. So our time today then is going to be sort of segmented into probably 3 areas that I'm going to cover off. One is sort of just level setting us all around the post-pandemic world and what that means for human brain evolution. As Rob mentioned, I'm a neuropsychologist by background, so every time I have to think about something new, I do sort of anchor it in the way that the brain functions. And then I want to leave you with some food for thought around how our brain is probably adapting to this world that we're currently living on, what fit for purpose leadership looks like, and some tools and techniques that certainly the audiences that I've been speaking to over the last year have found useful. And so without further ado then, I did find about a year ago that as we had moved through our the subject of resilience post-COVID, leaders in whatever group or constellation that I was working with them on did talk about feeling that things should get better and should feel better, but actually not feeling great at all. And so I did start to think about the post-COVID hangover, but also something that has started to come through in the narrative of human experience, this idea of we're now living on a polycrisis planet. So it feels like COVID was just the tip of the iceberg. Wherever we go, there's some existential threat that faces us as a species. And of course, that affects us personally and at work too. So I had revisited this old concept. It's been around forever, the US military acronym to describe the world during the Cold War, VUCA. And I liked this Forbes visual as a way of helping everybody to sort of remind themselves of how this feels for the brain. And this idea of volatility being a roller coaster, this idea of uncertainty being that you just can't go from A to B, that moving forwards requires you to take account of so many more factors, that actually it's not a simple and linear thought process anymore. Whenever you're making a decision, every decision needs to go through various pathways and networks. And finally, that there seems to be a sort of a fog that has fallen when it comes to decision making when you're a leader. So linking that, thinking about VUCA and sort of the way that our world feels to us right now, might be useful to go back to the way that our brain functions. And I've always found Paul MacLean's model, the triune brain, which some of you will have come across, quite useful as a shorthand to understand the way that our mind works. And I think the main bits, so rather than sort of going through, we could spend an hour talking about this, but I think the main bits to remember about the triune brain is that we like to believe, and leaders certainly identify with, their decision-making coming from the neocortex, that part of the brain that's uniquely human, that we have, that specifically ours, the most recent part of the brain actually that's developed. So, logical planning, good decision-making, prioritization, etc., all sort of neocortex-led functions. However, I think post-pandemic, what we found is a lot of our decision-making is coming from the limbic system, because the limbic system has been triggered. So, and that is about sort of COVID and how that left us, but subsequently all the other macro forces at work to make us feel as though we're in a perpetual state of threat. And of course, the monkey brain, the limbic system, is uniquely designed to deal with threat. It's activated by sustained threat conditions, and it's much stronger when it's activated than the neocortex. It dominates. And a great lot of work by Steve Peters on the chimp paradox brings to life this idea of this very strong monkey brain when it's been triggered, and the fact that it overrides the human brain or the neocortex. So having reminded ourselves of that, then it's just worth thinking, how does the brain then react to this sort of sustained threat, this polycrisis conditions? And that does is activate a state of hypervigilance. And you may recognize some of this, both in terms of your personal experience, but also in the workplace amongst colleagues. So there's this sort of scanning for threats. There's persistent sort of triggering and easier triggering. There's emotional reasoning. And there's a growing sort of risk aversion and second guessing around making decisions, especially high stake decisions. And all of this is happening because the monkey brain is searching for a pattern to cling on to, something that makes sense. Remember that the brain is a meaning-making organ. It wants to make meaning out of the world. It wants a story. And so it's searching for a pattern. And I think the bit that I'll leave you to think about is actually the brain will just make do with any pattern that it finds as long as it's a pattern. So if that's how the brain reacts, then how do we actually respond to the brain behaving that way when it comes to polycrisis conditions? Well, this idea of the pattern machine means that our brain creates a comforting and often false reality. And again, you may find this in certain pockets of your organization where there has been people are over-indexing on defining goals, and even quite complex situations have been reduced to binary choices. And it feels like you can't have an open debate anymore because options get closed down in the interests of expediency, making fast decisions. And it might feel as though we're all sort of creating convenient categories so that we can just box everything up faster. And what that ultimately means is that we're privileging the simple. And we're also fixating on the concrete. And what we're not doing is taking account of abstract, hypothetical, neocortex variables. And the work by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, of course, has been around for a long time, the black swan effect, but it's worth revisiting because it's just uncannily real at the moment, in a way that it perhaps wasn't when it was first published. So what does all that mean? So we've talked about the VUCA brain, the VUCA world, and we've talked about the monkey brain. And so how would I sort of leave you thinking about all of that? Well, the fundamental brain trap that I do feel that organizations are falling into, and their leaders are role modeling this, is that it seems that for every complex problem, there is a solution, and it is positioned as being clear and simple, but actually a lot of the time it feels wrong. And this is a wonderful quote by H.L. Mencken that just brings us back to the idea that our brain does like patterns, and any story will do, and it will comfort itself by finding a story to hang on to at the cost of dealing with the complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty, and volatility of the world that we live in. So my first sort of reflection point would be, have a little think about the different ways in which the monkey mind has showed up in the workplace since the pandemic in your organizations. And I'm sure somebody's taking a look at the chat, so feel free to put questions in around that. I've certainly found both in Volvo Group, where I worked until February, and Lloyd's Banking Group since, that the monkey mind is showing up more in the workplace. So is there light at the end of the tunnel? Well, the wonderful thing about the human brain is that it remains plastic all the way through life. And neurons that fire together wire together. So if you think about if you manage to get your brain into a new way of thinking, reframing the way that it's thinking through complexity, it will eventually create a habit out of it. But as we know, breaking old habits and forming new habits, any psychologist will tell you that's one of the hardest things to do. So how do we do that? How do we normalize the way that we're feeling about stuff, and how hard it seems to be to make decisions, and how everything feels just a little bit too tough? And I think David Snowden's got a fantastic, the Cynefin model, again, the old one's always best. Now, he used it in IBM in the late 90s, but I think this wonderfully brings to life for me sort of the complexity that that we're dealing with, the new normal. And the point here is that pre-pandemic, most all corporate organizations operated in this sphere, the clear space, which is known and familiar. It then took best practice and took the ladder down occasionally into the complicated space, knowable but unfamiliar. And it used that best practice to extrapolate into that complicated landscape. Very occasionally, organizations would take a ladder to the complex world. The complex world is unknown. And this is where you would get leaders together to brainstorm and play with white space and visioning and future states. And this was usually when organizations were transforming themselves, moving into new markets, and requiring their leaders to think about the future differently. And so those three territories are probably, charted territory for most organizations. Now, pre-pandemic, most organizations never needed to work in chaos, the unknowable space. And I would argue post-pandemic, that's what we've had to pivot towards. As organizations, as ecosystems of human beings, we've had to acclimatized to the fact that the world is now chaotic. It's unknowable. It's not just unknown, it's unknowable. We simply do not know what is going to happen next. And this is and that's the reason why brains feel flooded. And that's why we feel overwhelmed. And that's why it feels that we're more drained around very difficult decision making, and we might become a little bit more conservative and second guessing. So how do we navigate in that chaotic, unknowable world? Well, we navigate it by actually pivoting away from right decision making to good enough decision making. And why do we need to do that? Well, because we've moved from a world where we've got problems to solve to a place where we've got polarities to balance. And what is a polarity, you may say? Well, polarity is a clinical concept, but it has it made inroads into the corporate sphere pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic, it's all there is. And we do need our leaders to start to think about polarities and to help the organization balance a polarity. So you may be thinking this is becoming very psychological and you're not really sure, it feels quite jargony. Well, here's a polarity that you do know, because all through the pandemic, we were dealing with the health of our nation states and the economy of our nation states. And the thing about a polarity rather than a problem is there are no solutions. There's no straightforward solution. There's no right move, because both sides of the polarity, health of the nation, economy of the nation, needs to be balanced. So any move forward has to take account of the other side. So you can't decide on a solution for dealing with COVID in a country without taking into account the economy. And you can't make moves with regards to improving the economy of a nation without thinking about the fact that there is a virus that's affecting society at large. So all through the pandemic, our politicians and our sort of global health organizations were having to deal with trying to get us to understand that there was no clear way forward. We had to balance these things. And so it felt to us as if they didn't know what they were doing. And it also felt to us that they weren't sure. And that's what it feels like when you're balancing a polarity. You can't be sure. It's good enough for right now, but you don't know what's coming around the corner. So you have to leave yourself room for maneuver. And so reflection number 2, what are some of the polarities or paradoxes that you have had to manage in the workplace? Now, at this point, you might be sort of struggling for examples, but the one that we all have to as employees is life, your personal life versus your professional life. Parents have to be an employee as well as a parent. So we all have personal polarities. And the reason why this came from the clinical world was often people who presented in clinical environments due to extreme distress had so many polarities at work that they couldn't balance, that they found themselves stuck and unable to move forward constructively, and therefore needing therapy and intervention. So there is, there's one that I've come across within a sort of a corporate context, which I think does appear to be sort of quite generalizable. And that is, we need to perform in an organization at the same time as we need to transform. And this tended to become the polarity that came out most often when I spoke to leaders over the last year, was how do I balance that need to perform and business as usual to actually fundamentally transforming the organization at the same time? How do I get that across? And if you look at the leadership literature, it has been slow to sort of catch on to this. And I think Mark was talking about this in the previous keynote, this idea that actually we're probably not doing a great job of equipping leaders for this polycrisis planet in which they have to balance polarities. Because we're sort of thinking that the archetypes we have in place are good enough, and the leadership archetypes actually, after COVID, have become redundant. The dominant paradigm in the past has always been the hero who sort of knows the right answer and leads everybody through with a vision and inspirational leadership, sort of followership and buy-in. We've got the servant leader, which is sort of the opposite sort of approach, which is a shepherd to the sheep. But also the servant leader doesn't know what they're doing. And so they're sort of guiding everybody, and they have responsibility for doing that. In the world of fintech and agile, we've moved towards this idea of host leadership, where the leader sort of sits in a huddle in the middle of purpose and purpose-focused teams, and the leadership mantle might be swapped by anyone in that team that, in a way that plays to the strengths and is in service of the delivery that team is there to do. But I would argue that actually the post-pandemic world, in which we have lots of polarities to balance, requires a different kind of archetype, and that is, it's an archetype that balances all the different forces at work in the ecosystem at that moment. So this is a visual seesaw. It's the best I can come up with, I'm afraid, around this idea of what leadership feels like currently. So all of these things feeling like they're up in the air, and this need to constantly sort of balance through leadership, which ones you pay attention to, where you put your focus, but always maintaining balance in the center so that nothing tips off. So the new kid on the block, the host leader, probably doesn't quite capture the kind of leadership challenges that are being faced at the moment. And I would argue that over the last 6 months or so, we've started to see different kind of language when it comes to leadership. And this is just some interesting language that's come through about the leadership skills that we will need to navigate this world of radical uncertainty. This idea that leaders need to build existential courage. They need to worry less about consistency. They have to be able to communicate both and. This is that idea of balancing polarity. They have to be able to be vulnerable about what they don't know, and because what they don't know, there's a lot more of it now. In order to sort of have that existential courage, this idea of we might not know what's around the corner, but we're moving forward in a way that gives us, net a good chance of being successful as an ecosystem. There's this idea of developing a serendipity mindset. And this is actually the greatest kind of innovation and transformation for our species has not happened in business as usual circumstances. It's happened when we have not known. It's happened in that not knowing space. That's where innovation happens. So serendipity is sort of that opportunity in chaos. And then Mark was referencing some of this idea of what kind of an ecosystem do you create for all of our employees so that it feels inclusive, that they're part of the journey. And so certainly we've had to talk a lot more about what potential means, and potential not being for the 1% who have been tapped on the shoulder with a talent badge, but everybody's unique potential and how that's leveraged in service of the ecosystem in a transparent, inclusive way. And to do that, we've also had to close the gap between the individual's personal purpose and the purpose of the work and the purpose of the company. So this has started to come through the literature around the kinds of leadership skills, qualities, the sort of direction that leadership is taking. And this time last year, Nathan Furr and Susanna Furr published their book, The Upside of Uncertainty, and here's the website. Nice compendium of tools to help individuals and teams navigate through complexity. And on the next couple of slides, I've got a couple of them. I've just chosen a few. This idea of building on this idea of a serendipity mindset, that if we locate success as a finite lens that's about winning, achieving success and completion, then there's this relentless goal orientation where failure is not an option and everything's about the end game and there's a winner and a loser. Whereas if you play an infinite game, and it's interesting that the symbol for an infinite game is the same as polarity. This is about possibility, renewal, and enrichment in a safe to fail environment where you learn from your mistakes. There's iterative innovation, there's conscious collaboration, and the aim is continuous improvement. So I think that's got to win. This is an older one on page 82. This is Tina Selig's riskometer. So remember, we talked about the fact that when the brain is triggered into the monkey mind, tend to become sort of loss averse, a little bit more conservative and indecisive. And again, Mark was mentioning this idea of cognitive agility and fluidity, and that for certain is an aspect of leadership that is unassessed and unfocused on, and that in the future, I suspect that's going to be a big pivot for assessment functions and talent functions. But in the meantime, Tina Selig's riskometer helps individuals and teams to plot where they have risk affinity and where they have risk aversion, so that they can fortify their risk aversion areas and they can embrace their risk affinities. And essentially the idea is to sort of expand your risk tolerance. So that's quite a neat tool. And then this one that I'm not going to have a chance to go into due to time, and it is a little bit psychological, but the idea is that, you can, what we're really wanting to create through leadership and learning architecture is an ecosystem of enlightened path breakers, the top right, where the narrative is my goal is to be the best, do my best work in a way that contributes to the world. What happens as a result is a bonus when it's good or just luck when it's bad. So this idea of your control orientation allows your brain to think, actually, some of these events are within my control and some are outside of my control. So it's a blended sort of control environment. And also my goals are internal. I'm internally motivated to come to work and do my best. And in the other boxes, and do take a look if you get the chance, there's some wonderful language about what happens when you drop into a different combination of control and goal orientation, ruminating progress, Machiavellian obsession, or mercurial fatalism. I've certainly, when I've coached executives, seen various versions of that when people have been triggered by sustained stress and uncertainty. So again, another interesting tool from Nathan and Susanna Furr. So that's it. I'm just going to leave you with some questions. And just ask a couple more questions of you. How prepared do you think your leaders are for navigating a work environment that's filled with radical uncertainty? How will success in your organization have to be reframed to equip and ready leaders of the future? And to what extent will performance paradigms of tomorrow have to be different from the dominant ones of today? So that's it.
Yamira, thank you so much for that keynote. We do have a couple of questions that have come in on our Q&A for you. The first one is, how can leadership foster a culture that values continuous learning and development?
I think by role modeling it. So what you do find stops a sort of a learning culture from evolving to where it needs to get to is this constant sense that when you're trying to make time for learning, that it's always it's scuppered in favor of firefighting and day-to-day demands. So, you know, just try and get headspace of leaders around leadership and growth and all of those things, and you will often find they do not have time in their diaries. Now that then sends the signal that actually it's your day-to-day firefighting that's more important than actually sort of leveraging that growth mindset. So I think, you know, as much as we'd like to say that the top 1% of a company are, you know, we shouldn't be privileging them, the symbolic leadership around learning is so important. They have to continuously be building into their narrative of leadership what they've learned, and that they've unlearned things in order to learn new things, that they've made time in order to reflect and think and grow. And it's only if they do it visibly that the people that are working in those ecosystems will feel emboldened to do the same.
I think this question is similar, but I'm going to fire it anyway. What role does leadership play in implementing and sustaining a learning culture within an organization?
I think you're right. It is a similar question. I think leaders would love to believe that there is some magical way in which you can pull a rabbit out of a hat and create a self-sustaining, self-organizing learning culture. What they don't realize is that in order to learn, you have to hold the space for learning. And that is actually a real discipline in a very busy, very challenging, very stressful world. All of us, it doesn't matter what level you are in an organization, you might leave an hour for learning, but there are competing demands to get a million other things done. So how do we feel that we can make the right decision in those moments that matter, that privileges our learning over the million tasks that we've got to tick off? If we regularly see our leaders doing that and talking about those and creating a community of learning and contagion and sharing those learnings and insisting that everybody meets a new benchmark of learning year on year. So I think some of the sort of work that's being done in career paths, where you talk about the license to practice every year, that just as doctors and psychologists and dentists have to do continuous professional development in order to have a practicing certificate for the next year, certainly we introduce that to engineers in Volvo through the engineering career path. And I think we will find that coming into most career paths. In order to get your license to operate next year at the same level You have to demonstrate how you have grown towards the new benchmark that is being articulated and role modeled by leaders.
Amazing. Well, Himara, thank you so much for taking those questions and also for your fantastic keynote presentation as well.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. 3 amazing and insightful keynotes. We're going to take a very quick break. And then when we come back, we'll have 2 more keynotes, which will then be followed by a panel discussion as well. So don't forget, you've still got a chance to get your Q&As in when someone's delivering their keynote. If you want to ask them a question, please feel free to get it in that Q&A box. But I will say bye for now, and I will see you in a few moments' time.
Greatness. It's not reserved for a chosen few. We're all born into greatness. Your drive, your goals, they're greatness just waiting to come out. That's the thing with greatness. It has to be uncovered, nurtured. It's a journey. So let's get going. Let's grow with engaging content and a learning experience designed to help you be an even better you. And talent development solutions that unleash hidden potential. This is a commitment to continuous learning in an ever-changing world, helping you acquire new skills so you are always in demand. Because you're an asset worth investing in, a force your company will pull out all the stops to attract, develop, and retain. This is how we're creating a confident, productive workforce, better employees to make better companies, to make a better world. Yes, it's a shift in mindset. And we're on this journey too. Let's do it together. Find the greatness inside you with Skillsoft. Greatness. It's not reserved for a chosen few. We're all born into greatness. Your drive, your goals, they're greatness just waiting to come out. That's the thing with greatness. It has to be uncovered, nurtured. It's a journey. So let's get going. Let's grow with engaging content and a learning experience designed to help you be an even better you. And talent development solutions that unleash hidden potential. This is a commitment to continuous learning in an ever-changing world, helping you acquire new skills so you are always in demand. Because you're an asset worth investing in, a force your company will pull out all the stops to attract, develop, and retain. This is how we're creating a confident, productive workforce, better employees to make better companies, to make a better world. Yes, it's a shift in mindset. And we're on this journey too. Let's do it together. Find the greatness inside you with Skillsoft.
So there we go. After that very quick break, we're now going to move on with 2 more keynote presentations before we have our panel discussion. And our next keynote is going to be delivered by Sarah Lupi, who is the Global Head of Employee Experience for Sanofi Consumer Health Care. Sarah is currently the Global Head of Employee Experience, leading a team that drives culture, diversity, employee engagement, and learning. Having lived in multiple countries, Sarah also brings a diversified 14 years of experience in HR and commercial roles. She has a business-focused approach, always aiming at building environments where every employee can thrive together. She has been guiding organizations through deep transformations and cultural changes in global and multicultural settings. And Sarah is going to be delivering her keynote on the Challenger Journey, a leadership development program to drive business and cultural transformation. So Sarah, all the way over to you.
Thank you, Rob, and hi, everyone. So we are now moving to the Olympics. This photo was taken in 1964, and it was actually captioned, "Fosbury flops over bar." And in an accompanying article, a probably even kinder reporter had added that he looked like a fish flopping in a boat. Some other people were even mentioning that Fosbury was the world's laziest high jumper. And so, as I mentioned, this guy is Dick Fosbury, who is an American high jumper and is being considered as really one of the most influential athletes in the history of track and field. And when he started experimenting with some new techniques of high jumping at the age of 16, he had to challenge the environment around him. He was having some difficulties at the time in competing what was the dominant high jumping technique of the time, which was rather about going on the lateral side and landing on your legs first. And since that was not really serving him and the morphology of his body, he started trying with different techniques and experimenting with other ways of doing the high jump. At the time, beyond, of course, the poor and poorly flattering comments that he was receiving from the journalist, he also had to challenge, first of all, a bit the rules and the environment. In itself, the rules were not necessarily saying anything specific about the how you would do it. The only rule around high jump is that the competitors, they have to jump off one foot at takeoff, and there is no rule governing how the competitor crosses the bar. Yet, of course, his competitors, when they started to see that he was jumping quite high and higher than them, they started to try to challenge the rules as well. Then you have to challenge the conditions. At the time, as we were saying, the majority of his competitors would land on their legs. So you can imagine that the landing surface was really not looking like the high and soft mattresses that we have now. So in the way for those conditions to change, he also compressed a couple of vertebrae. And then he had to challenge his own coach, because at some point his coach, when he was experimenting different techniques, he was kind of pushing him back and persuading him to rather try to fine-tune the standard technique and the straddle technique of the time. At the same time, he pursued what he believed was really serving him. And in 1968, at the Olympics, he won gold medal in high jump. And since then, the Fosbury technique has become the standard within this discipline. So what I would like to share with you today, it's really the challenge and the journey that we are taking within Sanofi Consumer Healthcare around becoming challengers and really being able to have our challenger mindset, helping us to drive a business transformation, to challenge our ways of doing business, our industry, our competitors, and of course, ourselves first. And I will share with you how we have been really leveraging also learning, and in particular, some leadership development programs to support us in this cultural transformation. Just to give you a bit more about our context, so Sanofi is one of the world-leading pharmaceutical industry with a very broad footprint in terms of geography, as you can see, with really a large presence both from manufacturing sites and research and development investment that we have. What I would like to focus on today is this green box, which is the consumer healthcare business. Because at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, with the elaboration, the creation of our new strategy, the CEO, Paul Hudson, also informed us, and there was the communication to the press, that this part of the business, the consumer healthcare, would actually start a process of carve-in. Why it was decided that this specific business unit would do a carve-in process? Well, first of all, it was to support the main focus of the group around really the focus on pharma, because consumer healthcare are all the OTC products that you can get without prescription. So the business model, you can imagine, is a bit different. This would also enable them, as since this is a different business than pharma, it is also regulated and the legal constraints are different ones. So it would enable us to fully unlock our potential as a non-pharma business with dynamics that are actually much more similar to the FMCG business than pharma, and to create a full end-to-end business that goes from innovation, manufacturing, commercialization of the products around the world. But we are not the only ones in this space, because this is a tendency that many large pharma companies have been starting to do. We have seen the creation of some companies like View more recently. And we know that at the moment, we have everyone looking at us, and maybe they are not the judges assessing what grade we should get for our dive, but in our case, it's really investors and analysts looking at what is our value, what is our agility, what is our ability to continuously innovate. And it is in this context that we really ask ourselves some questions. So who do we want to challenge? And this is pretty clear. When you look where do we range, we know who are our challenges and what's the competitor, the landscape of our competitors. Then it's about what do we challenge? And what do we challenge? It's the market, it's the way we access our consumers, is how can we get closer to our consumers? How can we come up with more creative ideas from a marketing perspective? What can we do to contribute to our sustainability, also impact in a different way? And then it's, once you define the who we challenge, what we are challenging, it's also then how we are going to challenge. And to define how we are going to challenge, we actually decided to run a diagnostic internally beyond the annual survey that we would get from the employees. It's to get additional insights about the how and what is that we actually really needed to make sure that the story we tell outside is fully consistent with the story that we tell inside and that it's shared by our colleagues. So something that we found out, it was that people felt empowered in really testing new opportunities. They felt they had really an entrepreneurial spirit. On the other side, there were some elements that we knew we had to work on. First of all, it was building a culture of feedback. And so how can you really make sure that everyone feels comfortable in doing so? What are the techniques that can be shared? What is the environment that we can create around that also? That would make sure that we would go into that leverage the entrepreneurial spirit even more. On the positive side, we also knew that there was an element very positive around collaboration. People naturally would support each other. On the other side, sometimes the fact that we brought in so many people in the teams to make decisions also over-complexified some situations. So how can we go back to simplicity and also to reduce bureaucracy somehow? So having in mind those elements, what we did was defining our new why, our mission, that we want to bring health in your hands. We redefined who we want to be, and we were really to build the best FMCH, and FMCH stands for fast moving consumer healthcare company in and for the world. And then we define a set of behaviors that are really, we believe, are going to enable us to really drive this change. And so there are some elements you can see around the take action. It's really our ability to execute and to follow through. Stretch, it's about how are we going to raise the bar, innovate, look beyond. There is a feedback piece that I was referring to also before. And behind this, it's really an ability both to double down on our strength and then challenge each other on the opportunities. And last, it's about valuing togetherness. We know we are in a period in which there is a lot of change happening, and we have probably a bumpy road ahead with some uncertainty, because after the carve-in, what's going to happen? We don't know yet. But first, we really need to deliver on that. And then we will see how the external environment is also going to react. But therefore, it's really important that we are on this together. And behind this valuing togetherness, we also added the elements around inclusion. to really make sure that that there is and we build that psychological safety that really enables everyone to bring their best self and to feel themselves at work. So how do you bring to life those behaviors? What we had decided to do, it was setting up a very comprehensive communication and engagement plan, making sure that we were aligning all our people and culture, HR topics, processes, initiatives, projects to those behaviors to really show full consistency. And this was done through our performance cycle. This was done also in the way we communicate and we define expectations. It's done around the time management part as well. And it was therefore critical also that we would enable especially our leaders to start with, as in this case, we want to go both top down with some initiatives and then bottom up with some others, making sure that we would equip everyone with a full understanding of what do this behavior mean to me? How can I translate them in my daily life and in my daily priorities? And how can I make sure that the priorities of my team are fully aligned with this? So as I was mentioning, some initiatives were more bottom up. We have a group of influencers in the different countries and also in the industrial sites. We make sure that they are keeping the topic high on the agenda, that they are bringing also different perspective, both to the leadership, to the local leadership, but then also to us in terms of what are really the needs and give us a bit of a pulse of the situation. But then we really felt it was important to start from the top to ensure full engagement and commitment behind this vision. So we had the first engagement of our senior leaders during a leadership forum with our top 150 leaders. And then after that, we really thought we need to engage their direct reports, because though they are the leaders who have the largest teams, who really can have the biggest impact if we are sure that they are fully on board. They can mobilize really the masses. So what we decided to do, it was to build a leadership program, an immersive leadership program that would help us really build this transformation and this change. Here is the idea, clearly, why now, when we explain to the participants why we want to do this now. And also, it's also the reason we used to really build the case with the leadership to also to get the investment, the budget investment that was needed, but then also the time investment. And some of my colleagues before, they really made also this reference on the importance of finding dedicating time and really building an engagement around the learning journey. So this is really for us a critical time. So it is the moment to make sure that we step up and we also increase our maturity from a leadership perspective. We started by really identifying those leaders that are really playing a critical role, and we are expecting them to role model those behaviors and to make that visible to their own teams. And then in return, what we are telling them is that, of course, they can be part of this journey, playing an active role, and that they will be also working, of course, being part of a community of other leaders. But then there is also a piece of having additional projects they can work on and have a direct impact on the business beyond the specific role. The way we built it, and I can go a bit more in the details, it's really by co-creation. So co-design with our leaders has been absolutely critical at all the different steps. We did a diagnosis before to really get some additional insights. And then we made sure that in all the different steps of the code, of the designing and the definition of the program, its content, the pace, we would have not only, of course, our partners from TPC leadership who have been driving this part, and we would have colleagues from the HR function, and we would have business leaders and future participants This was really to make sure that we were integrating all the different aspects in the journey, and that we would especially integrate also the senior leaders in understanding how important it would be their presence and the role that they would need to play in the program itself. We have actually asked them, beyond being each time we have one senior leader being a sponsor for the cohort, but beyond that, we also asked them to be present in different moments of the journey, to either share their experiences or to listen to some of the proposals coming from the participants, to moderate also some sessions, to facilitate some others. It's really important that on top of the external faculty that we would have, we also have some of our leaders that are bringing the inside voice, and they are also positioning themselves really as role models in the area. And then we, of course, created it in a way that it can be a blended learning, with opportunities of also creating some community learning, because during the program there will be 9 months with different steps, and there will be one moment of in-person training. This is also for reasons of budget and sustainability approach that we have decided to do it in this way. But at the same time, we wanted to give an opportunity to our colleagues coming from different parts of the world and different functions to meet each other and to be able to connect. So we are going to give them that opportunity with one face-to-face, but then to continue to develop that and the relationship that they will establish also in a virtual community based setting. So these are some of the different steps, and the different steps you can see, it's pretty much standard also what you can see. What I felt it was really the difference also, it's this opportunity of co-designing and co-delivering also the training with really a full engagement by the senior leaders. And so if I have to sum up a bit our learnings around how to make sure that we are embedding our culture also through a different view of what leadership looks like, and how we can convey those messages through a development program. It's really about making it visible. What is the expectation that you want? What is that you want to achieve? Co-design, co-deliver, co-lead, and make sure that there is full leadership accountability. Because at the end, if one of your participants would go in the development program, find one session particularly inspiring about how to be disruptive, how to test and try new things, and how we want to fail fast. But then they come back on the Monday after, and if they found themselves in an environment where they even struggle to move the minimum element to get things done in a process, then it will be disconnected with reality. And this is where we are asking leaders to really create an environment where when the participants are coming back, they are really finding an environment where they can put everything that they have learned into practice. Of course, while challenging the environment, challenging themselves, challenging our industry and our organization. And I will pause here, and I'm happy to take questions, comments, shared experiences that you may have.
Sarah, thank you very much for that keynote. We have had a couple of questions come in, so we'll jump in with those. And then if anything else does come in, we can always touch on it in the panel discussion, because am I right in thinking you're joining us for the panel discussion in a little while?
Yes, I will.
Perfect. So the first question we've got for you is, how does the Challenger journey align leadership development with business transformation goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we built, it's actually the alignment. It's really with our behaviors. So we made sure that in our leadership development transformation, we keep those behaviors really at the core of how we want our leaders to act. And by the way, leaders at all the different levels of the organization. And this is how we really built it. in a way that is consistent. And it's the same way as I was saying that we apply also for performance, how the goals are set, and then how do we assess it at the end of the year. We are having at the moment some additional thoughts whether we need to add some competencies as well to complement the behaviors. And we are currently identifying some specific elements that will make us build probably a leadership frame that is even more complete than what we have at the moment. So that will be coming up next.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. The next question we've got is, what are the key components of the Challenger journey that contribute to cultural transformation?
So it's the fact of connecting people from different areas of the business. So there is always this importance of the network. It's the fact that they are working on different levels, starting with self-awareness, teamwork moments around specific projects, receiving coaching. Probably the most important, because that also relates with some tangible results, is the fact that they will need to identify within their own space one area, one project, one initiative on which they will challenge themselves. They identify it at the beginning, and they will really need to carry that project on with some of and applying some of the learnings that they receive. And that really needs to create some added value for the organization. And there is somehow an assessment at the end also around that. So on top of the personal journey that they are making, and in this case, the comparison between 360 assessment done at the beginning and at the end on their personal journey and what the people around them could observe, there is really also the tangible aspect that is expected around the value creation for the business by the end of the program.
Amazing. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for taking those questions and also for your keynote presentation as well. And hopefully we'll see you a little bit later on in the panel discussion. Well, there we go. 4 keynotes down. We've got just one more to go before we move on with our panel discussion. And our final keynote is going to be delivered by Mohammed Bilal Khan, who is the head of performance management for North Africa, Levant and Iraq at Unilever. Now, Bilal is a business graduate and CFA charter holder with diverse experience in the fields of financial and investment analysis, including corporate finance, business partnering, transaction advisory, treasury and equity research. He currently works at Unilever as head of performance and management for North Africa, Levant and Iraq region. Furthermore, he is founder of Plain Vanilla Counseling, a virtual institute for financial and investment analysis training. Additionally, Bilal has been a teacher of undergrad and master's finance elective courses at a business institute, instructor for CFA exam preparations, and an active volunteer with CFA Society Pakistan and CFA Institute. Bilal also passionate about bridging the gap between academia and corporate world and actively takes initiatives to support this cause. Now, Mohammed is going to be delivering the keynote on unveiling the critical role of corporate learning in employee retention and engagement. So Mohammed Bilal Khan, it is over to you.
Hi Rob, thank you so much for the introduction. Just a quick check if my voice is visible, if my voice is audible to everyone.
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot for the introduction and thank you for giving this opportunity to speaking to this wonderful audience. And thank you so much everyone who is attending for taking up time to listen to this session. So the topic which I will be speaking about is unveiling the critical role of corporate learning. Given the limitation of time and the vastness of the topic, I will try to focus on the key aspects and I will try to leave you with some food for thought for you to build upon and then apply in your respective organizations and careers as you go back. So moving on, I will start with one key fact, which is the pace of change. And this is something which we all know, but we might haven't thought about its implications and impact on the businesses and us. The pace of change around the world in the past couple of decades have increased significantly. And post-COVID times, it has gone to unprecedented rates with everything changing, including the businesses, how we do the businesses, including the knowledge domains, including the types of learnings, the tools, and everything. And just sharing some examples that there are things which we could only be dreamt of have now become a basic everyday reality. So for example, if we go a couple of decades back, we could only dream of having a video conference or a video call with someone while watching them. While now it has become an everyday reality within just a couple of decades. On the other hand, there are things which used to be everyday reality, which is now becoming history or are vanishing from the face of the earth. So taking some examples of like audio cassettes with magnetic tape or floppy drives, all this was a part of our lives just a couple of decades back. And thus in just 2 decades, it has become something which has vanished from the face of the earth and which is history, which new generation wouldn't even know about. So within a span of 10 years or within a span of about 20 years, the things which could not be dreamt of are becoming reality and a basic everyday need. And the things which used to be very useful and being used in everyday life are becoming history. That is how the world is changing. And just sharing some further facts around it, according to futurist, an American futurist and computer scientist, Mr. Raymond. It is said, or he estimates that there will be a 20,000 years of change in 1 century alone. So in the next century, the quantum of change will be equivalent to the 20,000 years of change. And that is because the rate of change itself is increasing at a very high pace. So the change after 20 years will be 4 times more the change which has happened in the past 10 years or in the past, or which we are experiencing now. And every 20 years, it could go to 4x or 5x of that pace. So that means that with this change happening around us and with the environment changing so at such a big pace, the learning and development focus is now required more than ever, or its importance have increased more than ever. And it is also evident from the fact that World Economic Forum raised a warning in 2020 that about 1 billion people need to be reskilled by 2030. And they named it as reskilling emergency in the world, in which they said that there is a massive amount of reskilling required around the world for people to survive with the new set of skills which is required, or with the new changes around us. So guess what? With this change happening, or the unprecedented change happening, the uncertainty have also gone to unprecedented levels. It is becoming more and more difficult to have certainty about the future, or to have certainty of how we do the business, or how a corporation will evolve or will operate. And so in order to deal with that certainty, any organization which wants to survive or succeed in this environment, that organization needs to observe the changing environment, and it needs to predict the future environment, and it needs to respond to the changing environment around it. And so that means there is a continuous effort required in understanding the change which is happening, and then responding to the change quickly within the right time. And how do you think an organization would do that? The only thing an organization can do that is if that organization is learning about the change, or is embedding a mindset of corporate learning across the organization, or is embedding the framework of corporate learning across the organization. Only then can it train its people, or continuously upskill its people, or make them learn and develop to have the necessary skills, or have the necessary information which is required to respond to the rapidly changing environment, in order for the business to survive and grow. Otherwise, survival or growth of the business will be compromised. And hence, it has become very important for organizations to focus more on corporate learning and establishing a corporate learning framework within the organization. Moving forward, I will be sharing a few more facts on some research and surveys which I came across. According to a survey, 80% of CEOs around the world think that the complexity will continue to increase. However, less than 50% of them think that they are prepared to manage it. Now, looking at this fact, how do you think that they can prepare for this change or prepare for dealing with complexity? And again, the only answer is that in order to deal with the complexity, the organization will need to train its employees to use the tools which can change the complex data, or which can change the complex information into simpler information, or which can analyze the big data, or which can analyze the huge quantums of information being created. Only the companies which are able to train their employees in the right time, or upskill their employees in the right time to deal with those complexities, will be able to deal with them. Otherwise, they might not be able to survive the change. Going to another key fact, which is that the number of business leaders finding ability to change to be biggest challenge have increased 2 times since 2010, which means that the ability to lead change is the key skill, or is the biggest challenge for any business leaders currently. And what do you think will be able to help them with leading the change, or who do you think will be able to lead the change? Only those individuals, or only those organizations which can understand the change, or which can predict the change, and which can respond to the change within the right time, will be able to lead this change. And again, that is only possible if there is a continuous effort into into upskilling, into learning, and if there is a framework and mindset in place which enables corporate learning continuously throughout the organization and throughout the business. So again, all this highlights and supports the critical role of corporate learning, or how the corporate learning's role is increasing. Moving on to a few other facts which I came across in surveys, that half of the employees now in today's world expect a major change in their jobs within every 6 months. And in order to meet that need, of change, because the employees are now getting bored of the mundane jobs very easily. They want a change. They want to learn. They want their learning graphs to be very steep. They don't want to keep doing the same thing for a very long period of time. And in order to provide them with this opportunity to learn, organization again need to have a corporate learning system in place which enables the rotation. So, for example, rotating employees into different functions after maybe 1 year, 2 year, or whatever it is, and giving them the opportunity to experience new things, gain new skills, and learn new things. And just sharing an example, the organization which I work in, which is Unilever, in the past about a decade which I have worked here, I have done about 9 different roles. I change the role every 18 months. So that's how I progressed into the organization, and that's how the organization have been able to keep the employees interested, because they are rotating the employees across different functions very quickly. Moving on to another key fact, which is organizations are launching an average of 5 major projects every year. In order to deal with the change which is happening, there is a need to come up with the new projects, that is new savings projects, new machineries for production, new products to serve the consumer needs, new projects to reduce the cost, new products to come up with the innovative products to serve the consumer needs. And in order to manage those new projects or new things, obviously new kind of training and new kind of learning is required, which again takes us back to the key thing, that is, or the key action, that is a continuous corporate learning framework is required, whereby employees are being trained for new things, new challenges, and new projects. So again, all of these which we discuss, all of these facts make it very obvious that for any corporation to survive, it is becoming now a necessity to have a strong corporate learning framework, without which it might not be able to grow in today's world. And the benefits of this corporate learning is now becoming very evident. The facts are already showing it as evident. There is a research from Deloitte which shows that those organizations which have a strong learning culture in place, they are 92% more likely to develop new products and processes. So, which means, or which reflects that in order for an organization to compete by producing or by making or developing new products and new successful products and processes, in order to an organization to compete using that, they need to have a learning culture. Without the learning culture, it will not be possible for the organization to be able to compete or to be competitive in the business. Secondly, they are 52% more productive and 17% more profitable. So if we go a couple of up to 3 to 4 decades back, what businesses used to do is that they would invest, for example, taking an example, that they would invest into a machinery which will produce products, and those products will be sold to consumers. And then they would continue to use the same machinery for 30 years without any change or without having a need to do anything new. But now this is not the case, because new versions are coming up. Technology is changing every day. And so making an investment doesn't really mean that you can now sit back and reap its benefits. You will need continuous investment or continuous upgrading and continuous upskilling in both the employees and the machinery and everything, the assets which you use, in order to be competitive. And now you do not need to only invest into marketing or into products or into machinery. Now there is also a need for investing into human capital and their learning, and establishing a learning culture and upskilling the people. Because until and unless you upskill your people, and until and unless you have a learning culture in place in your organization, no matter what product you produce, you will not be able to compete in the business, because you will not be able to understand the right demands of the consumer. You will not be able to understand the changing consumer trends. You will not be able to tap on the changing trends across you. And hence corporate learning culture is showing its benefits. That is, the organizations which are focusing on corporate learning are able to perform better and create more value for the shareholders as well. And organizations themselves have also realized this already. So if we look into the surveys, about 80% corporate learning and development professionals believe that there is a need for greater innovation in learning to keep pace with the today's business demands. So there is an understanding and there is an acceptance by the organizations themselves as well, that the corporate learning and the professional development is now required more than ever to keep pace with the today's business demands. It is not an add-on thing now. It is now something which is required for survival and which is required for competing in the businesses we operate in. And the spending on frontline leadership training has increased 310% in 3 years, which again reflect the importance of corporate learning and the realization of this by the corporations. However, having said that, having talked about all of the importance, having talked about that how critical corporate learning has become in today's world, there is still a large room to be covered, and there is still a large gap to be covered. While organizations are focusing on it, the number of organizations focusing on it are still less. Only 25% organizations are providing training to existing staff, while other organizations still do not realize the need, or still do not realize the potential of corporate learning. However, I think it is a matter of time, and sooner or later they will realize it, that in order to survive or grow, they need to upskill their employees, they need to upskill themselves, and they need to have a strong corporate learning culture in place. And another key aspect is that the collaboration between industry and academia is very weak still. Corporations and academia are operating in silos. There is very lack of corporate collaboration between academia and industry. And going forward, by driving this collaboration, or by driving the intersection of knowledge between industry and academia, a lot of value can be created. Because the academia which you have, the universities and professors and all of them, they have ample resources and time to do research, to understand what is changing, to predict the future and to predict the needs of the future. While on the other hand, the industry have the resources to serve those needs. So if industry, which is corporations and academia, come together and collaborate more, they can create value for the overall people around the world, because academia can do the research and find out what needs to be done, and corporations can make it happen or can execute it. So it's a win-win situation for both, and it has immense benefits. We did it in Unilever in one of the country, and the benefits were very significant. So we started with collaborated with the academia to develop a program for students training, in which we both co-created a training program to provide practical knowledge to the students to upskilling the talent. And we realized that those students which attended these programs were able to land jobs for more quickly, or were able to land better jobs compared to the other peers. So that's how we were helping develop the talent in the academia. On the other hand, we also collaborated with the academia to design the training programs for our employees, which were run by the professors of the universities within the universities. And the value which we got out of those programs was higher than the value which we would have received, or which we received from the other trainings which were done by the consultancies or external agencies. So this in itself, the collaboration can unlock big value. And also the another key point, which is the corporate learning is not an add-on thing now, but it has become the key for talent retention as well. Now, in order to retain talent, you do not only need to pay them or reward them with the monetary benefit, but you need to reward them with the learning and exposure and experience as well. Otherwise, you will not be able to retain them. So again, talking with an example, if we go 3 decades back, people used to study in universities for 4 years, and then they used to apply that knowledge for next 30 years in their careers, without having a need to go to university again, without having a need to relearn or learn anything new. But now people spending time into universities, when they graduate after 4 years from universities, whatever they have learned, that is only used in next upcoming few years, because after that, that knowledge becomes redundant, and they have to relearn in order to be able to, they have to relearn and they have to reskill themselves in order to progress in their careers. And this has given a rise to the fear of redundancy. Talent is now, or the new people are now afraid of becoming redundant in their careers. And so they only want to spend their time with the organization which future-proof their careers, or which provide them with the ability to learn on job, or which takes interest in their learning and develop them. Sorry, I think I dropped. So I will just, my connection, I think, dropped. I will just share my screen again. Let me know if it is visible. Is it?
Yeah, it's all good, Mohammed Bilal.
So the last thing which I was talking about is that the corporate learning has become the key for talent retention. And I was talking about that that people now are afraid of becoming redundant, and so they only want to join the organization which future-proof their careers by investing continuously into their learning and development for careers. And sharing some research facts from it, a LinkedIn survey shows that 94% of the employees claim they would remain with the company longer if it simply invested in their learning. So you can see the importance that the employees want to remain with the company only with the company, want to remain with the company if it is investing in their learning. Also, companies with a strong learning culture have 30 to 50% higher engagement and retention rates. This is the research from Deloitte. Also, another research or survey shows that 86% of professionals are willing to change jobs if the new company offered them more opportunities for professional development. Again, you can see from talent retention perspective, the importance of corporate learning and engagement. And another survey shows that employees who get professional development opportunities have 34% higher retention than those who don't. So it means it is not only to compete, but also to be able to retain the talent or attract the right talent. Corporate learning has become more than important. And hence there is no future for corporations without focus on corporate learning, and corporate learning is the future. And embedding a corporate learning mindset and a framework across organization is the most critical thing for any organization to survive and grow in current times. So this is it. If there is if there are any questions, happy to take the questions. Are there any questions? Or
Mohammed, thank you so much. Yeah, we've got just one or two questions before we kind of move on with our panel discussion. The first question we've got is, how does continuous corporate learning impact employee engagement and retention?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if this question is still there, because I answered this question towards the end, and I will just summarize it again. That employees are now afraid of their future careers and becoming redundant, because they know that the pace of change is so fast that they cannot learn something and continue to apply it for next 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years throughout the career. And so they want to join only those organizations which enable them with the opportunities for continuously learning and upskilling themselves. And so in order for organizations to attract the right talent and to retain it, it is essential that they invest in their learning and development, and it is essential that they invest in corporate learning, because without that, it is now becoming impossible to retain the talent. So that's how it helps.
Perfect. Thank you. One final question for you. What innovative strategies can be used to integrate corporate learning into the daily workflow, and how will these strategies improve engagement and retention rates?
What innovative strategies can we use to integrate corporate learning into the daily workflow? I think one of the key strategies would be the use of technology. That is, using the technology and building the knowledge warehouses. So in a lot of organizations, what is happening now is that the organizations are creating knowledge warehouses, where all the information, all the trainings pertaining to different areas, different segments are available all the time. So this allows the employees to self-run. So any employee can log in at any point of time during the day if they are faced with any challenge, if they are faced with any learning need, if they are faced with any question. So instead of relying upon any other individual, or instead of being dependent on some individual to teach them, they can just go to the knowledge warehouse and search for it, or talk to a chat bot and ask for it and get their answer. And they can get the right courses being made available there. They can search for the right courses, and they can just get the quick courses and do it, or see a video tutorial to learn. So I think the knowledge warehouse, building a knowledge warehouse and making it available to the employees with a very simple and user-friendly interface is an innovative solution which can help drive the learning agenda across organization.
Amazing. Well, Mohammed, thank you very much. You're not going to go anywhere because you're going to be joining us for the panel discussion. But before we have our panel discussion, we're going to quickly show you once again the video message from our amazing sponsor, Skillsoft.
Greatness. It's not reserved for a chosen few. We're all born into greatness. Your drive, your goals, they're greatness just waiting to come out. That's the thing with greatness. It has to be uncovered, nurtured. It's a journey. So let's get going. Let's grow with engaging content and a learning experience designed to help you be an even better you. And talent development solutions that unleash hidden potential. This is a commitment to continuous learning in an ever-changing world, helping you acquire new skills so you are always in demand. Because you're an asset worth investing in, a force your company will pull out all the stops to attract, develop, and retain. This is how we're creating a confident, productive workforce, better employees to make better companies, to make a better world. Yes, it's a shift in mindset, and we're on this journey too. Let's do it together. Find the greatness inside you with Skillsoft.
Okay, so we have now come to the final part of today's virtual summit, our panel discussion, which is the future of corporate learning for businesses in 2023 and beyond, the trends that we cannot afford to miss. And hopefully we're going to be joined by 4 of our amazing keynote speakers. We've got Mark Onisk, who is the Chief Content Officer at our gold sponsor Skillsoft. We've got Sarah Lupi, the Global Head of Employee Experience for Sanofi Consumer Healthcare. We've got Dashini Santhanam, the Global Head of Scaled Customer Training at Google Cloud, and our most recent keynote speaker, Mohammed Bilal Khan, the Head of Performance Management for North Africa, Levant and Iraq at Unilever. Mark, I'm going to come to you first. What are the key trends that are shaping the future of corporate learning?
Well, there's a lot of trends that are shaping the future of corporate learning. I think certainly, as we reviewed in the session earlier, I do fundamentally believe that generative AI is really changing, what we teach, the curriculum that we roll out, how we actually deliver and teach that, and how we actually work together as a profession to kind of envision and generate new learning experiences. And so I think that's really kind of the macro hyperscaling trend that's going to impact, our industry at multiple levels, for the foreseeable future. I think as part of that, a couple other things to think about, in a world of, as I said this morning, of, prompt engineering and large language models and NLP and so forth. I mean, what's needed is leadership skills. I mean, it's these technology initiatives and transformations, they ultimately succeed or fail based on the efforts of your frontline leaders, and your leaders are either kind of embracing and they're setting the right tone for the others in your organization, or they're not. And we need to think about how leaders actually mobilize through kind of this period of acute disruption. I think the other thing that's kind of a very much a nascent, and nascent's not the right word, but it just isn't getting the same level of headlines or press right now, is really sustainability. I mean, I think if it were not for generative AI and the breakthroughs of GPT and Bard and Bedrock and others, at this point in time, we'd probably be focusing a lot more on sustainability. And I do think that, I don't know if organizations have fully thought through what are really the key kind of leadership and management roles around sustainability and how that really influences each function. And I don't think that L&D as a practice has really thought, invested the type of thought that's needed how to help organizations transform. So I would continue to watch for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Darshini, I'm going to come over to you on that one as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add when it comes to trends that are shaping the future of corporate learning?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I have to agree with Mark. I think in addition to all of the technology, the key here is really leadership. I wouldn't add anything, but I'd actually just amplify the piece on leadership and thought leadership around it, right? Like getting the right people to make the right decisions, to make this land in a way in which it's actually going to be useful for everyone, I think is going to be key. And going back to kind of what I mentioned in my my little slideshow was, we don't know what some of these skills are going to look like in the future, what the needs are. But what you want is adaptive leadership in place that's ready to kind of lean into the opportunities that come as they go. So I don't have anything specific to add beyond amplifying the leadership element.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thank you. Sarah, I'm going to come over to you with the next question. How can technology be effectively integrated into corporate learning strategies?
So for sure, it's making sure that we are aligning to what are the learning objectives that we have. The possibilities that really it offers us are multiple, and also to really maximize the learning experience. The main idea here, I would say, is around personalization and making sure that we are really offering to each one of the learners, on top, of course, of the possibility to learn any type and anywhere, but also set of opportunities that are really adapted to them and personalized to their needs. And then the possibility also to generate even more content that they will need, that they could use for themselves and for their colleagues. So it could really support us also in increasing more the peer learning opportunities that we would have, and give a different role and different tools for our internal experts.
Thank you, Sarah. Mohammed Bilal, going to come to you with the same question as well about how technology can be effectively integrated into our learning strategies.
Yeah, so I think while technology obviously plays an important role, and there is a lot which technology can do or is doing, I will just share one example which I just talked about a bit ago as well, which is creating knowledge warehouses. So with the use of technological tools now available, we can create knowledge warehouses with the interactive interfaces for the users, where employees can self-learn, employees can find out what suits their personal preferences. Employees can find out what they are looking for to learn, and they can easily access it at the time which they think is right. And instead of depending on someone to teach them, instead of depending on someone to tell them, they can directly access and do those courses or do the video tutorials, and that's how they can learn. And I will just share an example. In the organization I'm working in, we like on system, we have our own portals or our own access to different systems, where we have our future fit plan, where we have put in our future goals, and we have put in our requirements of learning. And based on that, it keeps on suggesting us the courses, it keeps on suggesting us the video tutorials, videos and textbooks and everything. And at any point of time when I'm free and I want to learn or I want to develop myself, I just log into that and find out what all is it's suggesting to me and start doing it. And with time, when I feel that I have now done it and this development need is no more there and there is a new development need, then I can change or update it on my system, and the system will then tell me or recommend me new items every time I log in. And that's how I can keep on learning and learning on self-learning basis with a personalized learning form, which Sarah also mentioned. So I think that is one way that technology can help a lot.
Amazing, thank you. Mark, I'm going to come back to you. How can an organization measure the impact of their corporate learning programs? Is there anything you do Soft that you would recommend as best practice?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I think that is old as the practice of corporate learning. Like how why does it take so long to develop programs, and how do you measure the impact? I will say, and this is maybe kind of a controversial point of view, if you're asking yourself like what the impact of this, if you're asking yourself what the impact of the program is, and you have to really squint really hard to see the value, then you probably didn't have great alignment to the strategy to begin with. I mean, that, like nobody asks like, what's the value of having an email system or calendaring system? Like, it's like, you would never think to shut off like email access or, a scheduling system for calendaring, because it's so, the value is so self-evident. And I guess I always think that learning kind of operates in the same kind of domain. If you haven't aligned very well to much of anything of value in the organization, then you're always going to be pushing the rope uphill to state the ROI case. I always go back to, learning should really be indexed in how it helps your organization and its people move forward. And you should be able to see tangible evidence in that in terms of the credentials that are earned. Do they actually move up in the organization? Are they getting the types of opportunities that you would expect? Harder to get data, but are their performance appraisals and improving? Are there any kind of external sentiment indicators and like NPS and customer interactions that they have? Are those things improving? And so I think that's probably where I would start to kind of to measure ROI. Again, we use some benchmarking capabilities at Skillsoft that help enable that. But I always try to tie it back to, if you're really struggling to even see what the alignment and measurement is, it's very difficult to do. So I always say, start with aligning to the strategy first, and everything else kind of takes care of itself.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Darshini, I'm going to come over to you. What role does corporate learning play in talent retention and development?
That is a great question. And look, I mean, there's tons of stats out there that talk about the importance of learning, but I think the way we need to see it is this. Learning by offering great learning programs and having a learning culture, you're not doing the employees only a favor, you're really doing your business a favor. You're doing the organization a favor. So having the right learning in place at the right time, available for the right people, does good for your business. So if you're thinking about the impact that learning has on retention, you want to retain your people. It's really hard to hire out there. Even if you have a ton of talent available, do they have the relevant skills? And then do you have the ability to train them up to be successful in your organization and then retain them after that? Right? There's so many questions that need to follow. So there's already a golden talent pool in every organization today that just needs to be nurtured to get to where it needs to get to. So I'd say outside of all the facts, we need to start thinking about learning as really doing good for the organization at a wider level rather than doing any favors to individuals only.
Thank you. Mohammed, Bilal, I'm going to come to you as well, because I know your keynote was about retention. Is there anything else you feel like you could add on that?
No, I think as Darshini said, like totally on point, which is that it is essential for the as I talked in my session as well, that it is essential for the organization's survival and success. Organizations in with today's pace of change, organizations cannot survive or cannot respond to the changing environment if they do not have a strong corporate learning framework in place. And sooner or later, organizations will realize it, because only the organizations which invest into corporate learning will survive. Others might not be able to, or most probably will not be able to survive this huge change which is happening around us.
Brilliant. Thank you.
If you allow me, I can add one point on the previous question as well, which was about the effectiveness, gauging the effectiveness of the corporate learning program. Again, just like Mark, it is not a popular view, but I think how you can help with it is that how much is your talent or the talent of your company is sought after or is looked for by the competitors or in the market. Like if your people are wanted by the market, or if they are getting good progression, or if they are getting good offers from the market and competitors, and yet you are still able to retain them, I think that means that you are able to develop your people. You are creating the talent which everyone wants, and still that talent is staying with you. That's how you can assess about the success of your corporate learning program.
Amazing. Thank you, Mohammed. I don't think it's controversial at all. I think it's a very, very fair point. Sarah, I'm going to come over to you. What are the challenges in implementing remote corporate learning, and how can you overcome them?
So I think also building on what Darshini was mentioning before about the fact that really the value of learning is for the organization beyond of the individual. It's really the fact of how do we manage to build a case and to keep it high in the agenda in terms both of budget investment, but then it's about commitment to learning and to creating a learning organization. Because we know all our leaders have multiple priorities. How are they role modeling? And how do we make sure also that our recognition system and our development opportunities are really offered to those who keep this continuous learning, who are sharing learning with others, and who are really committed to this. So that then there is really a natural tendency and an emulation for all the rest of the organization in that direction.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Darshini, I'm going to come to you on that question as well. What, in your opinion at Google Cloud, what are the challenges in implementing those remote corporate learnings, and how would you overcome them?
Yeah, I have to say, I think there's fatigue. Like after everything that COVID did to everyone with remote learning, I actually think that for a while there, we really struggled with fatigue. Like that's probably the most fundamental challenge we had. Fatigue around having to be in front of a screen for a little longer, to kind of miss that human interaction and that community, right? And this topic of community came up earlier as well, where we said really learning experiences through community can be so incredibly powerful, and that all of that went away. So I feel like with all things remote, That is still a challenge. I think we need to get even more creative and really depend on the knowledge of all of our learners to start to really build a more dynamic learning marketplace where people are learning from each other as well. So I'd say that fatigue, I still see it. I still see it in many of the programs we do, and people are just like, oh, yet another VILT. All right, let's do it. I mean, you have to do it. You'll do it, but I think it's going to take a while to recover from that and people to start getting full value from that.
Darshini, thank you. I think during this panel discussion, we've had some real nuggets of wisdom, but just to finish off, I'm going to come back to you, Mark, as our representative from our sponsor, Skillsoft. There's people who have attended today's summit who will be looking to improve on their current learnings, but there'll be people here today who don't do any learning at the moment in their workplace. So from you, what would be your key tips to anyone looking to start developing their staff and start doing their corporate learning within their business?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would advise people to do is really look at what are the strategic drivers in your business? What are your strategic objectives? Start there and just top to bottom, are you looking to build market share? Are you looking to optimize expense or generate operating efficiency? Are you looking to manage risk? Start with the basic statement of what the business strategy and goals are. And then say, what are the 3 to 5 skills that would help in the pursuit of that? And how does that look differently by function or role? And I would start the discussion there. And then I think you can unpack the learning solutions and what you really need against that type of framework. But I think that's the first step. It's always very tempting, especially as learning leaders, as you get a lot of advice and feedback from everyone around you about brands they've seen, courses they've taken on their own. Like everyone becomes kind of an expert, when you start shopping for learning platforms and content. But I think it's always very important for you as a learning leader to tie it back to the organization first and what you're trying to accomplish as a business. Start there and let the solution unfold from there.
Brilliant. Well, Mark, thank you very much. And to all of you for taking part in our panel discussion. Thank you to you, Sarah, to you, Mohammed Bilal, to you, Darshini, and of course to you, Mark, as well. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
So there we go. That is our virtual summit pretty much done and dusted. Once again, a huge thank you to our gold sponsor, Skillsoft. I hope you enjoyed today's virtual summit. I hope you found it insightful. And if you did, we do have some more virtual summits coming up for you in the not so distant future. Coming up on the 19th of July. So tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have got the Future of Small Businesses Spend Management event. So if that interests you, make sure you check that out. And then on the 9th of August at 3 p.m. British summertime, so the same time as today's event, we do have the Future of Digital Employee Experience 3.0 virtual summit. And that is shortly followed on the 22nd of August at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the Future of Compliance Automation for Businesses Virtual Summit, the 2nd edition. So they are just 3 of many virtual events coming up for Group Futurista. If you want to find out more, make sure you head to the Group Futurista website, where you'll be able to find out all about those events and all of the other events that we have got coming up throughout the year. We appreciate that you've taken the time to come out today. A huge thank you as well to our speakers who have taken the time to deliver the keynotes and take part in their panel discussion. Whatever you're doing for the rest of your Tuesday and the rest of your week, have a fantastic time. I've been Rob, we're Group Futurista, and hopefully we will see you again at another virtual summit really, really soon. Have a great day.